You know, the worst thing for a storyteller is having a story to tell and no audience to tell it to. So today I'm going to tell you about a boy named Jack. Now, you probably heard him. Jack's been in a lot of stories in the mountains for a long time. I'll be honest with you, he's much more akin to the folks down in Southern Virginia and the Carolinas than he is up here, but his stories run through the mountains. And in the stories, Jack is, well, he's a trickster. He's got a quick wit. Thinks of things real quick. Gets him out of a lot of trouble. I'll be honest with you. He's lucky more than anything else. It's luck that gets him out of more scrapes than anything. Now, talking about Jack, never really say how old Jack is in the stories. Jack is somewhere maybe not old enough to live by himself, but he's old enough to go out and have adventures. So we're going to say he's somewhere around 10 to 13. That's kind of how I always pictured him when I heard the stories. And Jack usually has a mama, not always. A lot of times he'll have brothers, although not as often as he has a mama. I guess he always has to have a mama. But he has brothers, Will and Tom. They're in some of the stories, and they're usually not as smart or as bright or as quick as Jack. And Jack, over the last couple hundred years, has developed a really bad trait. He's gotten lazy. Last 200 years, he just doesn't feel like doing anything. Now, Jack's stories have been around for a long time. The oldest we can trace them back to is about the 1500s. And they started as a part of Germanic stories that were told by mouth from generation to generation. They were called Märchen. And they were around for a long time before somebody tried to write them down. In fact, the first people that tried to write some of those stories down were these two fellas named Grimm. You might have heard of them. They did so well, they got a television show. It's pretty amazing. They wrote them down in the early 1800s and kind of made them their own. You might have heard one. There was one about Jack and this beanstalk, right? And the beanstalk had these magic beans and this magic harp. Well, the Märchen had magic. They all had some sort of magic, and they eventually kind of evolved into fairy tales. But Jack kind of lost the magic somewhere along the way and became more like just a normal boy. He also was never intended to teach a lesson. So when you listen to a Jack story, nobody at the end is going to tell you, now from that we learned, and Jack learned about, no, Jack doesn't learn anything in these lessons. He just goes on to his next adventure. Now, I mentioned Jack had a mama in a lot of the stories. And you had that storyteller feller here, that Adam Booth guy. And he told the Jack story. And it was kind of interesting because, now, I've been reading about Jack for about 5 years myself. And I had never heard about Daddy in any of the stories. And he had a Jack story with Daddy in it. He also had a Big Jack, and I'd never heard of a Big Jack. And I'll be honest, in the work I did and the research and the papers I read, all those highfalutin college people, none of them mentioned a daddy either. But I'm sure there's variations because the beauty of the stories was that they were never the same. And they were told, they weren't written. And they were meant for kids. They weren't meant for adult telling, they were meant for kids. So we're going to make you go back to your childhood for a few minutes. Now, I did mention Jack's daddies didn't show up in the story, but Jack had daddies. He had a lot of daddies. Probably his main daddy was a guy named Richard Chase. Richard Chase was a guy who was tracking Appalachian speech patterns, mountain folk, how they talked. And he wanted to do that through the way they told stories, because stories are very descriptive. So he was down in Boone, North Carolina, and he was recording people telling stories. And a fella came up to him, a guy named Marshall Falk. Not the football players, another guy. And this gentleman said, my family tells great stories. You got to come and listen to them. So he went to the family and he heard some of their stories, and they knew other families who knew other families. So for the next 3 to 4 years, he was listening to stories. And he kept hearing these stories about this kid named Jack. So what he did was he took the stories, and like a good storyteller, he took the best part of this one, the best part of that one, and the best part of that one. He put together his ideal Jack stories and published a couple of books, and for the next 30 years went around the country telling Jack stories and other stories he got from the hills. Now, Jack had other daddies that told lots of Jack stories. A fella named Council Harmon, famous for his Jack stories, told his sons the stories. And Orville Hicks and Sam Hicks, and a guy named not the trumpet player, but his name was Herb Alpert. He told stories. And their stories leave on. Now, the story I want to tell you today is a popular one. It's on YouTube. You can watch it being told. It comes from a guy named Orville Hicks, who spent about 30 years on the road telling Jack stories. Now, I'm going to try to be like a good storyteller if I can try a little bit, and I'm going to try to update it a little bit for my audience. So I'm throwing out the king, and I'm going to try to add some references that my children might know so I can make the story a little more personal. The story's called Jack and the Varmints. Of course, once upon a time there was this boy named Jack. And Jack was, he was kind of lazy. He didn't like to do much around the house. And because he didn't like to do much, his two brothers, Will and Tom, they didn't do much either. Which means a lot of times things just didn't get done. So one day, Mama went into the cupboard for breakfast, and she opens the cupboard. She looks inside and says, oh my gosh, there's no food for me to feed my youngins. So she calls Jack in. Jack, come here. Jack comes on in. She says, Jack, you're the oldest. Jack did not like those words. Whenever she started off with the words, Jack, you're the oldest, he knew something bad was going to come up afterwards. Jack, you're the oldest. She said, I have no food to feed you guys. You're going to have to go out, you're going to have to do some work and get some money and buy us some food. So Jack thought about this. Because Jack didn't like work. But Jack didn't like not eating either. So he figured he didn't like not eating worse than he didn't like work, so he decided to go out and try to find some work. Took along his whetland knife because he liked to whittle when he was out there. He was pretty good at it. So he walked for a while, not too long, because, Jack doesn't like to do much of anything except just sit around. So he got tired and he sat down, and there was this big piece of wood there. And he thought, that'd be mighty fine whittling wood. So he got out his knife and he starts carving away. And by the time he was done, he made himself a beautiful paddle. It was gorgeous. Jack could whittle. It was one talent he had, and it was gorgeous. He was right proud of himself. So he picked it up, decided to walk a little more toward town, and, again, he got kind of lazy and tired, decided to sit down. Now, it had been raining for a while, the last few days. There were lots of puddles around. Jack sat down. As he did, he was near a puddle, and there were flies all over the puddle. And he just flew away because he scared them. But they got used to Jack after a while. And they started coming back. He started watching them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 landed on that puddle. So he just real easy reached behind his back and got that paddle. And before they could fly away, he smacked them right down. Looked at it, he got 7 of them. Killed 7 of them with one whack. He was proud of himself. So he picked up that paddle, started walking in the town. And as he's getting near town, he came across a blacksmith. There was a tanner there as well, made leather goods. He thought, I need something to remind myself of killing those 7 flies. So he walks in and he says to the tanner, I'd like a belt with a belt buckle, something engraved on it. The man says, you got any money? Jack says, no, but I got this real nice paddle. He goes, I use this. I was out on the big lake. Big storm came by. I rode with that paddle, and it got me back home safely. So the man looked at it. It was a nice paddle. He said, all right, I'll take. What do you want on that belt buckle? I want it written there, Jack killed 7 with one whack. So he waited a while. Man got it done. Put his new belt on. He was just proud as he could be. Walks into town. Notices there's not a lot of people around. But he hears a commotion toward the center of town. So he starts walking toward the center, and as he gets closer, he sees this big man sitting atop a big white horse, middle of town. Realizes this is the mayor. And the mayor's looking very glum. And the mayor's talking to the townspeople, and he's saying, I need your help. I need your help. He goes, you know what I need your help for? You've been seeing the same signs I have. That's right. He said, you Miss Peaches, I know one of your pigs last week went missing. You were wondering what happened to it. Yeah, Miss Ann, your chickens, 2 of your chickens gone. Where did they go? Yeah, and Farmer Pete, yeah, oh man, that big prize cow you had just plumb disappeared a few days ago. Well, I had my people looking, and you know what? They found out what was causing this. There's a mountain lion out there in that forest.
big mountain lion, big teeth, drool going down the side of his face. Meanest thing we ever seen. I need someone to go out there and get rid of that mountain lion. Nobody said a word. He said, I really need someone to volunteer to go out and get rid of this mountain lion. No one said a word. And he said, we shall not be silent. I know that some of you were saying, wild horses couldn't drag me out there. You're saying everything is wonderful. But I know you're afraid. We're not going to turn this into a fear city. Okay, this is not a happy place like down there in Byhalia, Mississippi. All right? I need a volunteer, but nobody said a word. Then he glanced down. He saw Jack's belt buckle. And he said, Sonny, you know this fella named Jack? Jack said, well, that's me, sir. You're just the man I want. You come follow me. Jack wasn't too keen on any mountain lions. He said, son, you follow me and you get rid of this mountain lion, I will give you $1,000. Jack was interested all of a sudden for some reason. Jack followed him. They went out to the edge of town where the forest began. The mayor sitting up on his big horse said, now last time we saw the mountain lion, he went that way. So I want you to go out there and I want you to get rid of him. And I'll give you $1,000.